and welcome to Pock and Rob. In today's video, I am going to rank my top 15 debut albums. Now, when I say a debut album, I mean the first album that launched somebody into the public conscience. This means that, for instance, Simon and Garfunkel's debut album would be Wednesday Morning 5 AM. But I'm not considering Paul Simon's solo career as being his debut album. This means individual members of, say, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, Genesis, all of whom had successful solo careers, aren't included in this list. This is the first album that an artist released, whether they were solo or part of a collective. Before I dive in, I'll just remind you, as ever, to like the video and hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and click the bell to receive notifications about future content. So diving in at number 15 is Bucks Fizz by Bucks Fizz from 1981. This album I have very little objectivity about. It is the first album I remember properly falling in love with and playing till I wore it out. Even now, the opening track, Piece of the Action, is still one of my top 100 songs of all time and just brings me great joy whenever I hear it, as does the majority of the album. It's not an award winner. It's not likely to appear on anybody else's list of great debut albums, but it is on mine because it meant so much to me. Number 15, Bucks Fizz by Bucks Fizz. And number 14 is an album by an artist that very few people have heard of. It is Moxie Früvous' Bargain Bill. This made it onto my top 15 albums of the 1990s. It is their debut, and I think the songwriting on here is both eclectic and brilliant. Baby Loves a Bunch of Authors, the verse where they cram in so many famous authors' names and get away with rhyming them. Things like Doris Lessing and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So clever. King of Spain is a marvel as a song. It works in the name Moxie Früvous into their own song and successfully rhymes it. It's worth checking out. It is on Spotify. Bargainville by Moxie Früvous is my number 14. At number 13, we're moving into more familiar territory for many people, and an album that may well appear on many lists of great debuts. It is Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey by Bruce Springsteen. This is an album that contains Blinded by the Light, which was taken into the charts by Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Growing Up, Mary Queen of Arkansas, Hard to Be a Saint in the City, Lost in the Flood, Spirit in the Night. Really, really fine songwriting. And it's unlike pretty much anything else in Bruce Springsteen's back catalogue. It's a softer edge than you might be used to with Bruce Springsteen, but I think this is a terrific debut. And number 13, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey by Bruce Springsteen. At number 12, I have placed an album that routinely appears on greatest ever albums lists, let alone debuts, and it's definitely maybe by Oasis. So this is a record that contains Live Forever, one of the greatest ever singles of the 90s. Supersonic, Shaker Maker, Cigarettes and Alcohol, Slide Away, definitely maybe, on the strength of its songwriting alone, warrants a place in top 15 debut albums, and it's my number 12. At number 11, I placed an album that has kind of been trashed and disowned a little bit by the artist who made it, but I think there's much to enjoy on this record. Cold Spring Harbor by Billy Joel. It's an album with She's Got Away and Nocturne and Everybody Loves You Now. This album does have production issues. He really hated hearing it when it sounded like it sped up his vocal as well. And he's kind of disowned the original Cold Spring Harbor. But I think this is a really strong debut album. I included this in my top 15 albums from 1971. I think it's very underrated and certainly worth re-listening, and heralds to the world what a talent Billy Joel was going to be. It's a worthy inclusion on this list of debut albums. My number 11. At number 10, I have placed Hunting High and Low by a-ha, an album I have adored since it came out in the mid-80s. And this really sets the template for who a-ha were and are, and it's still what they're so good at. this electro pop with guitar sensibilities and Morton Harkett's unique vocals. It's crammed with hit singles. So there's the title track. There is, of course, Take On Me and The Sun Always Shines on TV, their only UK #1 hit single, and Train of Thought. And then there's 6 other superb pop slices wrapped around those 4 singles. Hunting High and Low is a great debut album, and it's my number 10. Number 9, I have placed Raintown by Deacon Blue. So I got into Deacon Blue because of their second album, When the World Knows Your Name, which is in my best of the 80s lists. But Raintown was their first record. It introduced us to the songwriting of Ricky Ross and his incredibly thoughtful lyrics married with some incredible tunes that he wrote. Dignity is the standout on here, but I would also tell anybody to take a listen to Chocolate Girl and Loaded. But around those are things like Love's Great Fears, which features Chris Rea on guitar. The opening track of Born in a Storm segued into Raintown. Town to Be Blamed. This is a really, really strong album. My number 9, Raintown from Deacon Blue. So, whilst editing this, I have just discovered that I missed out my number 8. So here it is. Number 8 is the debut self-titled album by Third Day from 1996. Third Day are a Christian band, probably my favourite Christian band, and their debut contains some of my all-time favourite songs. So Take It All, Thief, Blackbird and Consuming Fire alone would merit its consideration for this list, but it also contains Love Song, which is in my top 20 songs of all time. So Third Day is my number 8. And number 8 is an album that again appears in Greatest Albums of All Time's list, and it is Murmur by R.E.M. And whilst I don't think it's their best album, that's either Reckoning, Life's Rich Pageant or Automatic for the People, I do think it is a terrific record. Things like Radio Free Europe, West of the Fields, talk about passion, which I think is quite possibly their best ever song. Murmur is a terrific debut from a band that would go on to be the biggest in the world by the time the mid-90s rolled round. And number 6 is the most recent addition to this list, and it is How Beautiful Life Can Be by the Lathams. I had this as my best album of 2021. As I said in my 2021 list, this is kind of like Cheerful Smiths. It's got that jangly sound of the Smiths guitar work, but with much more uplifting and positive lyrics. So the title track is a total joy to listen to. In throughout, it's really beautiful. We also get I Won't Lie and I See Your Ghost, and some gorgeous ballads like I'll Never Forget the Time I Spent With You. And then right at the end, you get this really odd track, Redemption of Sonic Beauty. I can't wait to see what the Lathams do next, and whether or not their sophomore release will match up to the great songwriting on here. I really hope so. I hope they're not a one album wonder. The Lathams, How Beautiful Life Can Be, at number 6. At number 5, I have placed Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. The impact of this album can't be overestimated in terms of how it transformed the hard rock landscape in the late 80s. But this has got Paradise City and, of course, Sweet Child of Mine. It is blistering when you listen to Appetite for Destruction. Number 5, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses. And at number 4 is an album that I possibly wouldn't have listened to had it not been for Appetite for Destruction opening my mind up to harder rock and metal. Iron Maiden's debut from 1980. This is another album that really sets the template for what an artist is about, and that artist rarely deviates from what they're good at. Everything that's great about Iron Maiden is representative on this record. And there are songs on here that they still play live. Obviously the title track, because it's on every single one of their concerts, but there's Phantom of the Opera and Charlotte the Harlot and Running Free, their debut single. It's probably the best metal debut ever for me. Iron Maiden at number 4. At number 3, I've placed a debut album that I think is possibly the most important debut album ever released. And that's quite a bold claim, but when you see it, you may well agree. Please Please Me by the Beatles. Now, this is nowhere near their best album. In fact, many of the albums I've already featured on this list are musically better than this. But no album on this list has had the impact that the Beatles' debut Please Please Me had. Just think about the fact that this album kicks off with I Saw Her Standing There and concludes with Twist and Shout, and that the majority of it was recorded in one day. I think my claim that this is the most important debut album ever released has some merit. Number 3, Please Please Me by the Beatles. At number 2, I have placed an album that has launched a 40-plus year career. My Aim Is True by Elvis Costello. Now, if you watched my video from last week, you'll know that I ranked Elvis Costello's albums, and this is in his top 5, but it is not my favourite Costello album. However, its impact as a debut in the middle of punk is what garners it this high position on the list. And it gives us Alison and Welcome to the Working Week and I'm Not Angry and Pay It Back and The Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes and Less Than Zero, and I could go on. It's such a great debut album. This routinely appears in best albums ever lists because it is just so well sung, performed, and written by a man who is a musical genius. Elvis Costello's My Aim Is True is my number 2. At number 1, I have placed Hopes and Fears by Keane. For me, unlike many other albums on this list of debuts, this remains Keane's finest album. I don't think any of their albums subsequently have maintained this level of quality to the same degree. There are several tracks on here that are in my top 100 songs of all time. Somewhere Only We Know, Everybody's Changing, and Can't Stop Now. I think all 3 are top 100 tracks for me. And that is what sets this album ever so slightly above the other 14 that I've mentioned. It's the fact that I have personal favourite songs on here. And then the other 9 tracks, I think, are all extremely fine too. It's my number 1. It's Keane's Hopes and Fears. So that concludes my top 15 debuts. Let me know in the comments below, what are your favourite debut albums of all time? Before I go, I'll just remind you to like, subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications. I'll be back in a week with another video. But until then, thanks for watching.